Iñaki is an expert in the relationship between architecture and photography, or architectural photography and architecture, and has curated numerous exhibitions on this topic, as well as being a scholar at the CCA and at the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles. He also guest edited SOPHIA number 4, and was the conference co-organizer of the 5th international conference in this series. So just to hold up one of these books that Pedro has been publishing over the years. So Iñaki, you're going to present some of your thoughts, I understand, and so I give the floor to you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Wilfred. Okay, so let me share this. All right, can you see this? Yes, right? Good. So good morning to all. Thank you, Wilfred, from this kind presentation, and thank you, Pedro, again for thinking of me and invite me to join this conference. In a way, I have this feeling of being at home, even though I'm actually at my home in the Pyrenees in Spain. But whenever I jump into Skopje's work and network, and all the different events and research that are actually going on under Pedro's umbrella, I'm very happy to join, to be on board and to collaborate. And in this case, it is true that I guess many of you will already know me quite well, but it is true that I have these two, let's say, parallel ongoing fields of work. On the one hand, and all of them related to this common field of interest, which is the relationship, as Wilfred said, of relationship between photography and architecture, which I've been working on since, at this moment, more than 2 decades. But as I said, I have these two parallel activities, and one is the let's say research, and I've been working on especially on a research project that I got to study in depth the relationship of photography and architecture in modern architecture in Spain. And starting from that point, I've been, doing some different specific research, and maybe one of the last one was a book that we published 2 years ago, and published actually 2 books of Lucien Hervé in Spain, which was a very, very interesting experience. And well, anyhow, a few more things. But the point is that at this this morning, I'm here not as a researcher, but as a photographer, let's say. As you see, I'm here taking photographs of an abandoned facility, industrial facility. And this is something that I've been working on since at least 2 decades, because I'm happy to be able to do this parallel work, which is to think and research on photography, but at the same time to be active, visually active, and have my own visual interest and subjects and topics, and this is what I've been, and obviously it's not my main activity, but I've been able to develop a, let's say, parallel career on my personal work, and it has been, and I attended yesterday the lecture of my friend and colleague Jesus Basayo, and I enjoyed a lot because he spoke among other things about this world of the new topographics, which was for me like a discovery personally, something that I've been working on and rereading. I mean, under the contemporary scope. I'm not just taking or traveling or flying over the same topics that the photographers of the new topographics dealt with, but I am, given that I've been in the States several times and in different periods of time, this is a world that for me, I mean, it was very attractive for me to fly over those scenarios and to have like a contemporary reading of that same landscape, urban landscape, that same non-landscape, and all the topics that. So anyhow, and under this umbrella, and under this general scope, I began to work with these topics of abandonment and ruins, and so this is something that, as I said, was there from the very beginning. And for instance, this is the series of the abandoned gasoline stations, which is an homage also to the work of Ed Ruscha. But again, this is something that we could say that has been already been done, so to speak. But I, as an architect, which is something that is clearly one of my main, not a strategy, but something which is obviously in my ADN. I mean, I'm not a photographer, or I am also a photographer. I take photographs, and I basically I look at what it's around, but basically I do that with my eyes the eyes of an architect. It means that I like to look at these elements not as a photographer, so to speak, but as an architect, dealing with the topics such as the issue of typology and you know, and the formal aspects of both the objects that I depict and the formal structure of the images. So I have obviously a wider work, but I want to focus on just to go straight to which is going to be the topic of this visual essay that will be part of the next SOPHIA journal, I think. And for instance, I've been working since the last 10 years on this amazing space, which is a balneario, I mean, a water facility in the mountains in the Pyrenees in Panticosa. This is the typical 19th century facility of, you know, of people going to take their baths, you know, this idea of water as a source of health and so on in the mountains with pure air and things like that. So during these significant periods of the late the 2010, as you know, we all lived the economic crisis, and particularly in Spain, it implied that many of the construction that was going on at that time was left as it was, you know, was stopped and abandoned. So in this particular facility in Panticosa, they built, for instance, a huge parking space, a huge parking building, and that was left as such. And there was, these are images of that parking facility, which was actually, because the space is the territory, the landscape is, let's say, the typical mountain landscape. You know, it's all granite rock, and it's on 1,500 meters high, you know, and surrounded by 3,000 meter peaks around. So it's the typical high mountain Pyrenees and landscape, which is very, very strong, very both in winter time and also during the summertime, but particularly in winter time. So the idea of introducing a building in that particular space or territory means that there is a push, or there is a fight or struggle between the nature and the territory and the architecture that was trying to be built and located on that particular place. There is a significant building, which is this a building designed and built by Álvaro Sisa, which is a center for sports, for this typical place for high class sport men, trying to get ready for the next athletic season, and they go there. They have pools and indoor courts and rooms and hotels and common areas, and which so this is a particular drama because this amazing building by Álvaro Sisa was abandoned when it was about 1 month to be finished, to be completed. So it's a particular experience, visiting a building by Sisa, which is actually a ruin. And these photographs, for instance, were taken in 2012, and I've been working on these ruins for 10 years. So I've been photographing there quite often. And for instance, these are photographs taken a couple of years ago. And this is not Sisa's building, but another hotel that was designed by Sisa with another colleague. So, in these photographs, in this series, I try to deal with the issue of the relationship between a ruin, a modern ruin or abandoned space, a pure abandoned space, and the push with nature, and this exchange between an architecture that was thought to be a unique and magnificent space, and the way that nature has actually won the battle of this exchange. These are images also taken a couple of years ago in the parking garage, and I like this idea of abstraction as well. I mean, having deal with the issue of matter, both on the build side, I mean, on architecture, but also the idea of rock and nature. And in this case, for instance, this is I think this photograph is interesting for me, because you are actually portraying this abstract relationship between architecture and nature, and this I mean, there are many metaphors for me here, which I guess that I could develop them, but I think so to speak, or at least for me, they may be quite obvious, and I do prefer for you to have your own feedback on these images. But as I say, I think they obviously are meant to be to provoke a visual reaction, and think about this exchange between the built and the built environment with the territory, and this idea of junk, of trust, of abandonment, and also there is another issue here, which is the idea of there is not melancholy, but the idea of romanticism, because nature is so beautiful here that when you put on the same level these two layers of information, I mean, nature and how pure and magnificent nature could be, and also the idea of monumentality, because nature in itself is quite monumental, but also this architecture, which is quite brutalist and it's meant to be very strong and try to be very positive, on its relationship with the place in which it is located. I think it doesn't work that. I mean, I don't know if it works. Actually, it didn't work because it was not completed and was left as it is. This is, I mean, if we travel today to this place, it's like this. It has been like this for more than 10 years. So for me, there is another quite interesting, given that I take photographs as an architectural photographer as well, and I really like taking architectural photographs. I really love to take photographs of these abandoned buildings made of concrete in this case, and try to do that with the same, let's say, focus and with the same concentration and with the same strategies that I will be using when taking, let's say, typical or current or architectural photographs. So there is this idea of the beauty of the ugly, or the beauty of the basically on how the nature of matter and the textures of materials, in this case concrete, implies a rereading or a different reading of the space as such, because we only have to imagine this staircase or this double space or this finished, and we may perfectly imagine how will they look like, but we think this particular atmosphere, which is another word that I really like, the idea of atmosphere when we deal with architectural photography. I think that's also a very interesting point to deal with. So anyhow, I've been taking photographs of abandoned buildings, modern buildings. This is the Goya Museum was also begun, but left uncompleted in actually the home land of Goya, our famous painter, in Fuendetodos near Zaragoza. This is a building by a couple of quite known architects in Spain that, again, it was left as such. And I whenever I come across these abandoned spaces, I try to go there and take, and to basically to look at those spaces. But I mean, anything that has to do with transitional or spaces or architecture, or even as in this case, domestic space, and this moment in which the space is going to be transformed into something new. This idea of transformation, and the way that the same or the very process of transformation could be also depicted. I mean, because these are spaces that obviously we may think perfectly how they were before this process of transformation began, and how they end up being. And I like these in between scenarios, these in between processes, these in between moments, and because they deal with memory, with something that was and something which is going to. And again, I like to look at these spaces with a very let's say architectural approach and formal, not sophistication, but I mean, which again, ugliness, abandonment, and beauty are combined in a way, and may end up provoking a reaction or an interest on the viewer. This is another series on some abandoned railway stations of and never more used railway connection in Spain. Well, And in this case, for instance, if we look at these images, I think that I am focusing on particular aspects, on the idea of the relationship between interior and exteriors, the windows, doors. I mean, the idea of the in-between spaces, the idea of the relationship between the interior of architecture and the surrounding, and actually dealing with issues like light, and again materials, and used in the floor, on the walls, and things like that. So basically, just I'm finishing my brief introduction or presentation this morning with the topic that I am currently working on. And in a way, it's a topic, a subject that could be understood as a continuity of the work that I've been sort of developing in the last decades or years. As I said, I am currently living in the mountains, in the Pyrenees, not because of the pandemic or because of the COVID, but it's something that was in our minds, in my family's mind, before. I feel quite lucky to do this, to live in the mountains, and to actually be at the same time quite near Zaragoza and elsewhere, So, as you know, if you are sort of familiar with the few of or at least one of the topics that which is on the table on the current discussion of architecture in Spain, is this idea of the so-called empty space. Empty Spain. Actually, this is the topic of the last Bienal de Arquitectura Española. The idea of the empty Spain, meaning also the relationship between the rural and the urban, and the urbanity, and cities, and so, because as you all know, Spain is the population is basically concentrated on the main cities, Barcelona and Madrid for sure, but also on some other cities like Zaragoza, like Valencia, Bilbao. But we have amazing extension of areas and territory which is basically empty, and it is empty now because of because of the landscape, because of the topography, because of the geography, and basically because of the landscape in Spain, which is quite, as you know, quite dry in the interior of Spain, but also because Spain was a country that was built until modernity, until the 20th century on agriculture. It means that there were many little towns around the territory all over Spain. But basically 50 years ago, when agriculture was when this big migration of the countryside to the cities took place in 1960, basically 70, starting in the post-war period in the 50s, took place. So it means that particularly in areas like the Pyrenees and the mountain landscape, in which the life conditions here were quite hard at that time. Basically, we have this reality, which is that there are hundreds of abandoned villages in the Pyrenees. So, given that I live here, I decided to start visiting these abandoned towns. Took or and look at these towns from my own visual interests. And I obviously, I know that this is a topic which is very photogenic in a way, but and in a way it has been also, like many other subjects and topics, have been already been depicted. I mean, in terms of a documentary, as a documentary subject. But I wanted to look at this from my own perspective. I mean, from the topics or the way that I look at architecture. I mean, I wanted to look at these abandoned towns and villages uh, as if I would be taking, you know, architectural photographs. So it means that again, I don't want to look at these villages in which, by the way, we have amazing churches that are, you know, churches that may have you know, hundreds hundreds of years, which are monuments, you know, because we have this amazing architectural heritage, which is absolutely abandoned, you know, in the middle of nowhere. So I wanted to look at these uh, spaces, as you may start to see here, not with a sense of melancholy or romanticism, but with a sense, again, of a particular formal strategy and with a particular delicacy. I mean, meaning that when you look at these walls and streets that were stone finished at its time, that are now, you know, absolutely, you know, full of you know, this kind of vegetation and trees and I decided to, or this is a project which has just begun, but I am sort of interested on on trying to come up with different way to look at these abandoned spaces. I want to deal with this in terms of or I want to understand how beauty, the beauty that these formal spatial structure, domestic spaces had at its time is still kept or maintained, even though the building is nowadays a ruin. So this is basically, and of course, in some cases, these houses are they still have the objects, the furniture. I mean, that was there when the last the people living there left their homes. So to me, this idea of the presence of the absence. I mean, how in a way we can still think of the way the people used to live in these towns, and the way we may even think the way they have some kind of course, of relationship between the different families living there, and the way they live. They enjoy streets and plazas and you know, common places there, and also the role that objects had in the domestic view of these abandoned homes. And to finish, I am going to also to have a kind of dialectic vision of these towns, because I also am doing aerial photography since a few years ago, and I want to take these aerial photographs of these abandoned villages, and I would like to have like a dialectic depiction of each one of these houses, meaning that I would love to have like the on the ground image, and sometimes the image of the interior space, and compare it with the urban fabric, with the of the village as a whole, and also of each one of these homes. And to me, this is again a way of approach this particular subject from a very specific architectural perspective, meaning that what defines the nature of a space is actually the plan. It's like as we all know, and the Corbusier began to speak about that. I mean, the plan is the order, and the section or is the space. I mean, I want to have like this parallel vision on how we deal with these ruins, because it's fantastic to have these aerial photographs of these abandoned towns, because given that most of the most of these houses are completely are ruins. I mean, they don't even have the roof, and you can just have the walls. So it means that these are like drawings of the urban and domestic houses, and so we can deal with these images as if they were drawings or plans. So again, one thing is what we see, and other thing is what we can read in terms of the architectural understanding and the urban or topographic way these villages were actually settled down on the territory and nature and the landscape. So, I mean, this is basically what I wanted to present, to leave on the screen. Just if you think, or if you consider that this is something that we may talk about in the next minutes, it will be a pleasure. So thank you so much.
Iñaki, thank you very much for your presentation. A wonderful series of images and a very thought-provoking presentation. Let me try and set it in context with our topic, that is environmental transformations. There is familiar territory that you described to us through the photographs. You mentioned Ed Rocher, and you one is, of course, reminded of Paris, Texas. How else could some of these things not ring a bell? And for those who've been to the United States of America, one of the key, or even if you haven't been, if you've seen some of these old cowboy movies with the abandoned villages where the gang of cowboys enters, and there's only dust and the rolling plants and so on. We are seeing different aspects of the process of modernization, where in a way the topography of every country in the world is being unpeeled like an onion that is shedding its rotting skin, but from the inside, not from the outside. So, in the United States, there's a big observation already for many decades of dying shopping malls. There is a website called Dead Malls that's been operating for a few years, and it documents how small malls have been closed, and there are photographs which are not unlike the photographs that you've shown, Iñaki. Abandoned interiors, fallen ceiling elements, even snow inside on escalators inside shopping malls. So we see how economic circumstances force changes. And what we have here with the villages being abandoned in rural Spain is a changing modes of living, which forces the abandonment of communities. Where, once the young are sucked out of the villages, there's no future. And so this process of modernization, process of urbanization, leaves behind, in some cases, relatively intact ruins. In other cases, when the quality of building is not so good, things just collapse. So, in fact, your contribution is the other way around. It's like the environment's transformation, or the environment's reappropriation of artifice. It's not so much how environments are being transformed through artifice, but it's the environment returning. The nature is reappropriating what has been extracted from it, like rocks and beams and things like that. So with this kind of larger process of modernization, which also yesterday has been a big topic, where from neighborhoods in Egypt or in Dubai or in Shanghai or elsewhere, have forced the complete destruction or the complete neglect or the complete abandonment of neighborhoods and the transformation of huge pieces of territory into modern urban developments. We see the scale of operation and the scale of destitution, the scale of construction on the one hand and the scale of destitution and destruction on the other hand. And I think these two things are really quite complementary, and it's a great, it's a great contribution to this book, because it really completes the spectrum. So I just leave you with this particular thought, that I think this forthcoming issue of SOPHIA is going to provide a kind of a global, or provide global instances of these transforming processes on the one hand, but also a reminder of how nature in the end is the most powerful force, and we cannot resist it. And I think it's also, I think, a good reminder that while we are trying to come to terms how we are going to confront climate change, even if we don't do anything, nature will take it back. We are going to be, humanity, if humanity doesn't look after itself, mankind, civilization doesn't look after itself, nature doesn't care. It will just reappropriate everything.
Yeah, I think we have seen what has happened in Chernobyl, that right now, after decades of abandonment, there is actually an amazing forest in that huge town, and city, and many animals and wild horses and are actually living there, which is the best example of what you just said, Wilfred, that in fact, it's good to know that nature at the end will win the battle, if we let it doing its work. So
right. Well, while here we are, the older generation, I keep on saying this because we have selected the work of authors who are much younger than we are, and I wondered what their views are. So I welcome any contribution or any question that the colleagues have for Iñaki.
Could I
Pedro, yes, you would like to say something.
I would like to talk about these two concepts of ruins that you can see here. And of course, this is related with, well, architecture, city interior. They are like living organisms, and we ourselves are part of nature. And of course, nature at the end wins and takes over. But this, what I call false ruins, like the center of Cisa in Pentecosta, which are buildings that were never finished and never lived. So, and these false ruins, in a certain way, have a potential of understanding architecture in its more pure dimensions. How light, how forms, how the configuration of space is sought. And I think you really, with these false ruins, and because it's Cisa's project, I really feel that you can understand how he was thinking on the light coming in, how the environment and atmosphere he creates, very pure, because he took the photo that this is a false ruin, and it stopped in a way in the process of architecture, which is a process that the house is not finished, the building is not finished in one time. So documenting this process as here is, well, here as at this stage is very important. And I recall an exhibition that was made with the work of Luis Ferreira Alves, who's been working, a photographer who's been working with Eduardo Sotomoro and Cisa also for more than 20, 30 years. And in the exhibition, there were the photographs of the process, of the several process of building until the end. So you had these middle terms where you really felt this pure dimension of architecture. Thinking of that with the other ruins, that you feel another kind of message, environment that was an aura of what it was, of the people that lived there, their culture, their values, by what is captured. So these two, I think it's very rich. But the false ruins, in a certain way, link very much with this architectural process and the conceptual work, a visual strategy that allows for him to capture the atmosphere, the time, what is behind those, and you feel that the photos have this time. So the importance of the visual strategy and how you capture these things, and it's only by the specificity of the lens of the visual essay here is very important to communicate these things. The false ruins and the other ruins that are in a certain way giving us memories of how the space was lived and appropriated. It's interesting also nature. I think the potential that Cisa has of relating always with nature, and here with the green and the mountain, you also feel this in the ruin, in the false ruins. It's a potential of the architect who's thinking.
Iñaki, are you going to present both the Panticosa abandoned building by Cisa as well as your other photographs of the villages, the rural?
You mean on SOPHIA?
Yeah, in your vision essay.
No. Basically, the topic is going to be only the abandoned villages in the Pyrenees. Okay. Yeah. But I actually the Panticosa work has been already exhibited twice. Actually, one. These photographs, for instance, were part of the Spanish pavilion in Venezia, in the Biennale di Venezia, I think 4 years ago, under the topic of the unfinished, when we won the Gold Lion, by the way. And there was a new exhibition with this material in Pamplona last year, and there is going to be a in probably 1.5 years there will be a major exhibition with all my work of Panticosa in Huesca, in Huesca, I guess you know, it's another city here in the Pyrenees, but they have an amazing photography archive, historical archive of photographs taken in Panticosa of the former travelers taking photographs in that place in the late 19th century. So it's going to be like we are going to be putting together the current status of Panticosa and the historical vision of how this place was, how it was born, and like having the big scope and the big vision of how it began and how it is right now. So having these my photographs dealing with the historical photographs, which is going to be quite nice. And then there is another exhibition on CISA's building in particular, which is going to be shown in Gerona in next fall, and hopefully in Porto in the future too. I am very, very interested on how because I haven't reached CISA, of course, but I would really love to see what CISA thinks about these photographs. I am really, really interested on having his feedback on these photographs. I don't know what you think, Wilfred.
You should send them to him, so he'll be certainly writing to you.
Like Hervé did to Le Corbusier, he sent them.
Yeah.
No, but yes.
No, but because CISA's work is so coherent, so strong, so pure, so poetic. That how can you think of this as a poetic, vision? I mean,
well, even if you're quite right with most of the things, but when it comes to a false ceiling exposes itself as a false ceiling. So it lacks the same beauty as the reinforced concrete. Carolina Late has a question for you.
All right.
Well, it was just on the topic you were discussing on how CISA's work is still quite majestic, even in ruins. My question is, you have here included buildings in decay and with different ages, one could say, with different materialities. And my question is, when you conceived this sequence, if you were intending it to question the way we incorporate time and how buildings age and materials in this presentation. Thank you.
You mean what I think about the notion of time within my series? Is that the question?
My question is if in the sequence you selected, if you intended also to question the quality of aging in the materials we use. We were just discussing the false ceiling, and
well, my point here is not dealing specifically with let's say the architectural critique, which could be done, by the way, because of course we do appreciate the CISA's work, but it is true that honestly, and please don't say that beyond this this meeting, I think that CISA's building is not very, very, it's not, I would say, appropriate to this particular landscape. I mean, we all know that CISA has a language. I mean, CISA's work is quite, how do you say, reconocible? You can recognize it, right? So, and the thing is that, in fact, you may think of a CISA's, of a building by CISA, and it could be in Porto, it could be built in Berlin, it could be built in CISA doesn't have, in that sense, he doesn't consider the specificity of place, given that, of course, he thinks about the context. Of course, he does in a way. But in fact, language, the result is you can recognize the CISA's language everywhere. And
Yeah.
in this case, this building has a flat ceiling in the Pyrenees, which obviously is a flat building with vegetation, and it's a green roof. But in fact, I mean, given that you're going to have snow for 4 or 5 months a year, I think it doesn't fit, in fact, in that particular surrounding. So, of course, you can, and I mean, the use of this delicate, instead of a strong construction, this delicacy of Caesar's building details, and it is not really appropriate to this particular context.
Well,
so
exactly.
in fact, we could think about this as a critique to architecture itself, Caroline. I don't know if...
I think you are probably quite right with regard to the flat roof, though that's a big debate, and
big debate.
The town of Davos insists, and that's in Switzerland, right, right in the middle of the Alps. It insists that the buildings must have flat roofs, because if they have pitch roofs, the snow would fall uncontrolled onto the streets and kill people. So, you know, there are different takes on flat roofs. Nevertheless, I think it is quite clear that Caesar does study the site, and the best of his projects that are outside his own hometown and his own country are very careful studies of typologies, whether it's housing typologies in Venice or in Berlin, or whether it's to do with architectural language, as in, you know, the Netherlands. I mean, I don't know whether you have seen his library in his own apartment. He has a tremendous library, and it's not just full of architecture books. It's full of literature. It's full of you know, contemporary issues. He's one of the most well-read individuals, and one of the most carefully. He carefully studies all sorts of architecture, and the amazing thing for me, as my personal reading, is that when he comes to Berlin, he knows the work of Mendelssohn and he knows the work of Scharoun, and he makes a fusion out of the two and puts his own recognizable language on it, right? So it's kind of a series of syntheses, if you like. So anyway, I think that this is taking us away from the topic of the conference. Nevertheless, for the pure enjoyment of disagreeing with you slightly on this topic, I haven't been to Panticosa, so I can't really make a judgment on how suitable it is. Of course, maybe it's true that as architects get older, they get more insistent in leaving their mark, and maybe it's also a client that is expecting the mark to be left, right? So there's, you know, there's always a variety of reasons why something isn't perfect, though I can't say whether Panticosa is perfect as a design or not. So, you know, let's leave that.
Can I say something about about this issue? And I'm thinking it's the strong abstract language that Caesar has in all his projects since the beginning. And I think one of the most amazing things is how he relates with, you identify that language, he evolves with that language, as he integrates different influences, always with that language, and in relation to the context, how he integrates that, how he talks with the context in different ways with that language, and the works that we've been doing through photographic documentation with several photographers, and it's astonishing how, for example, in the in the case of the swimming pool of Lessa in the Quinta da Conceição, how his abstract architecture relates so strongly, almost complements nature, organic nature, through abstraction.
Anybody else, or Carolina, do you have a question to follow up?
Sorry, I would just like to clarify the question. Maybe I misdirected because, of course, I think that when you have such an important work, you build, even if inadvertently, your own landscape, and of course, it becomes self-referenced in a way. But what I meant is how in Iñaki's work, he also captures the way that these new materials, so we are a society that one can say quite fascinated with this progress, these new materials that have not yet been tested by time. And in this sequence of work, in my view, you also capture the way that these materials have not been tested and how they age differently. And I was just wondering whether that was intentional. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it was not probably intentional, but it's something that is a result, basically. And of course, if we see this is the typical epoxy floor, we used in every parking garage, But when you do this, when you use this same finished on the floor, you can clearly see that it's not going to survive in time in this particular place in which you have during many months in the year temperatures below zero. So when it's wet and you have ice and it's going to finish like this. And they may have thought of that in advance, but in fact they didn't. So they were not concerned about the healthy of the construction in time, but about the sophistication or the use of these facilities on a short period of time. Think that this project took place in 2006, in which we knew actually this was done like having in mind that what they wanted Panticosa to be, it's a 5-star resort, meaning that people was maybe coming from Russia or from Japan, taking, with a charter plane to Huesca, and then having a taxi and bringing them to enjoy skiing and all this amazing high-class resort. But so they wanted to be finished immediately. It was like a short-term consumption. They just wanted to finish it, and of course they didn't have in mind the idea of the maintenance of these facilities in time. So it is true that, of course, that I haven't this particular issue that you are raising as a topic that was important for me, but I think it's one of the many issues that can actually arise, and can actually be discussed when you look at my work, probably. And I'm glad that you saw that.
We have a question, two questions, one by Luciano and then George.
I believe Luciano was first.
So, Luciano, please.
I think we...
Please, I'd like...
Okay.
Okay, please. You.
No, go ahead.
You first.
No, Luciano, go ahead, please.
No, okay. Luciano, please.
Okay. Your work is incredible. It's very beautiful, and I'd like to know, how do you think the relation between the conception, the narrative visual conception, and the inventarious notion? I was thinking about the relation, for example, the notion the backers in organizations, your pictures, and you have a Rocher, and you have the other see about the relation and the relation with photography to organize it, okay? And the two ways to think build the narrative, the visual narrative, okay? Okay, what do you think about the relations, the different strategies to build in the narrative and in a setting?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you. On the one hand, the result of every project for me is something that can be analyzed and can be fixed on a second stage. I never start a project thinking on how the result is going to be arranged in terms of a visual narrative. I begin to look at the subject or the topic or whatever, and so it's only I sort of what I use is the light table, so to speak. I just began to think on what the way I look, and then I am starting to and then on the second stage, as I said, I begin to arrange to create a visual discourse. And this is, on the one hand, when I deal with topics, very specific topics, such as the abandoned gas stations, or another project that I have, which is about empty parking spaces. I mean, when I deal with typology, or I have another series on abandoned cars, and so when there is a subject that is repeated in terms of typology, I always do this like this idea of like the bakers, as you say. Okay, I want to see the differences on the very same topic, and how when you arrange a series of photographs dealing with the same topic, you can start immediately to draw different lines of reading, and comparing different. You can by flying over the images, you can start to think about possible visual exchanges between them, and you can start speaking about different layers of information and things like that. So this is one approach. And the second one is, like, for instance, on the Panticosas work, I like just somehow the opposite, as you may have seen. When I don't deal with objects like gas stations, like empty parking spaces, like cars or things like that, I prefer to deal with a space from the notion of the fragment. I mean, the idea of how to depict the whole by looking specifically to a particular space or situation within the space. I mean, I prefer to grasp, to depict the essence of the space, in this case, abandoned or the ruins or whatever, by just depicting or looking at a specific situation. Meaning that just by adding or collecting or building up or drawing the continuity of this visual narrative of specific visions or specific details, so to speak. Or, in fact, the idea of the fragment, to me, is the way to approach the whole by the fragment. It's just the opposite of as when I deal with typology. When I deal with typology, I just present typology or each one of these objects as an object in itself, and I don't look at something. I don't make a zoom in. Whereas when I deal with some other subjects, I just try to do the opposite. So, as I said, so this is something that I don't take a starting point in order to come up with a particular visual narrative, but I do just the opposite. I begin to look, I begin to yeah, to look even without taking photographs. And then when I have these images, I operate with them, trying to again, as if they were, for instance, bricks in terms of architectural construction. I like to think of it as a way to make a project in terms of the architectural notion of design. You know, this idea of taking images and build a narrative out of them. You know, as if I were putting bricks one up over the other. You know. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but this is basically what I think.
Yeah, it reminds me of your process. Reminds me of the question that has been floating since the 1920s in English literature and so on, which says, "How can I know what I think until I've seen what I've done?" Right. So, I mean, some people insist that you have to have a concept before you begin, and you know, the work of art is not always as linear and as logical as that. So we can sometimes we follow our intuition. George, please.
I just want to make a comment to the Iñaki's works. I really liked your presentation, and especially I really think that was very interesting the way you started and the way you ended your presentation. When you started to talk about the new topographics and the analogy of your work with the new topographics, and then at the end you shown us this work regarding the villages in Spain and using, I believe, aerial photographies, I believe done with a drone. I don't know.
Yes.
I'm quite not very a big fan of drone photography, but in certain cases, as you used it, for instance, I think it could be quite useful. Because if we look at the new topographics works, they were, at least I see it like this, sometimes too concentrated on the architectural objects or the construction. But then on your last work about the villages, the drone photographs can give us a notion about the set, the group of constructions, the group of buildings, and allow us to look at them as a set instead of looking at him through the photography, through the perspective of the human, of the individual objects. And since you are an architect, a photographer, but also an architect, in your work, I don't know what is exactly your intentions, but from what I understood, it could be very, very interesting to produce, let's say, the way this work of the villages could differentiate from the type of work from the new topographics could be probably by confronting two totally different visions. One is the individual concentrated vision on the objects, on the buildings, on a particular detail, and the different vision could be the notion, the knowledge of understanding this set of constructions, understanding the village in its totality, and maybe like it's almost as we could use one medium as the evidence of each element, and the other one was as a kind of way to understand the set, way to understand the totality of this landscape, this countryside landscape, maybe, I don't know if it is your intention, but maybe using work done with mapping, maybe you said you described this photograph, for example, that they look like drawings, and they really look like drawings almost. Looks like it gives me the intention to draw above that photograph. Gives me the when I look at these photographs, it gives me the necessity to trace them in order to understand them, to map it, you know, and probably confronting human scale photographies with aerial photographies and maybe drawings mapping these villages could be very interesting in order to give, let's say, one more step or two more steps than the new topographics way of capturing or depicting landscapes, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting.
Thank you, Jorge. Thank you for your feedback, which is very helpful for me too. Yes, you're right, and I'm glad that you sort of, in a way, understood what I was trying to say. I have to say again that this is not a finished. It is a project which is absolutely ongoing. This is something that I could for sure have produced for today's presentation a more specific or detailed presentation, because obviously I have more drone photographs of these buildings, so I could have present something more finished. But this is an ongoing project, so I don't really know what is going to be the ending or the final output of this project. But while you were speaking, I thought of this movie that I guess you all know, which is Dogville, Lars von Trier movie, right? Dogville. You remember that is actually a stage.
Are traced on the floor.
and the buildings are drawn on the actually that was a village, Dogville, right? And it was drawn there on the stage. So to me,
interesting analogy.
Yeah, to me this could be seen as in the same way. I mean, on the one hand, you have like the footprint of what these villages were, actually as if they were not designed, which is something very interesting. They were not designed on a 2D plan, you know. They were designed by just the experience of the space, of actually living there, you know. They never have an aerial view on how to, they never draw the urban fabric of the village, you know. They never use a line. They build just by this amazing notion of the work of the vernacular knowledge and how the houses should be arranged in order to take the best of the south orientation, and you know, in order to protect the streets from the strong north wind and so on, you know. So I think this could be very interesting, and to, again, as I say, to use, because you say that it could be also interesting to draw or to use some sort of graphic or to map it. Yes, I could think about that, but at this moment I'm not quite sure, because I like to use, in a way, aerial photography. And when you use this not on perspective, but when you do this perpendicular view from the top, you are dealing with this as a photograph, but as a plan. So I like this idea of using the same instrument of representation, which is a photograph, under these two different layers. So yeah, and I think there was a question on the air when after Wilfred's comments on my presentation, which is the idea that I am not taking these photographs for sure in documentary terms, or under a documentary approach, as a sort of mission heliographique report before the complete destruction of these villages, but just as the opposite. And this is not just a dream, but a fact. Many of these villages are supposed to be recovered. Not all of them, but few of them. There is this movement of rescuing these villages, of actually moving people back to these villages for vacation, but also for living. You know, the only thing you have to provide is a good infrastructure. I mean, good roads and internet, and of course access to healthy, to hospitals, or to commodities at large. So I really want to look at this as a tool to think on how to reuse these spaces. I mean, these are like elements that are ready. In a way, they are also for me like ready-made objects that somehow are at this moment on a latent kind of a state, waiting for someone to do something in order to change. The idea of the reconstruction, rethinking, reviewing, literally, this idea of looking again and see what these houses and streets and villages could be in the near future if they were transformed. So for me, this is not just a simple depiction, but something that in fact is meant to provoke a further or a future movement. Not only, of course, the villages, the abandoned villages, but in a way also everything that has happened in Panticosa. I mean, Panticosa, it's the failure. It's a failure. So there is, as Wilfred also said, a political, economic, social critique to what happened. I mean, and we cannot deal with architecture as something naive, as something that doesn't have consequences. So we need to have a very strong critical position towards, the way we transform the built environment, and the way we have to act or to react under the consequences of our acts. So for me, photography is the right tool to provoke this feedback, this rethinking of what we are doing, basically.
So I think this is a very important statement. And I think it also readdresses the question that Luciano had early on. What is the context against which you take these photographs? And I think your earlier answer is not quite well. It's okay in regard to the individual, shall we say, the phenotypical decisions that you make, but not to the genotypical decisions that you have made. The genotypical decision that you're making is that you're making a critique of contemporary society. And criticism or a critical position always either has a utopian projection or a dystopian projection. And because you are stating something that you think is not as it should be, and you have something, a foil, a context in mind against which you're measuring what you are criticizing. And it's either a better place in your view, or it's the worst place, right? So I think it's a perfect way to bring this conversation to a conclusion. And I would like to invite anybody else now to make some or to ask some final questions before we try to summarize this conference. Is there anybody else who would like to ask Iñaki questions, please?
Well, I have something to say if no one else wants to.
Please, Carolina.
Well, I would like just to add that for me, Iñaki's work seems very important in a way that as in language, the language we know and the words we know, in a way establish the conceptual frame in which we can think, in which we can express. The imagery, the environment that this visual language that we are creating for ourselves also creates new possibilities. And I think in the way of Iñaki works, it creates or it calls attention to a certain beauty or a certain potential beauty that, as he mentioned here in the end, it's to provoke reuse, to re-inhabit these spaces. And I also think that this should make us then also wonder what these images that we are putting out there are creating in terms of this parallel, uncontrollable language, image language. Like I'm thinking about, for example, some tribes that do not know the concept of, west, south, north, and so they think in terms of stars. And as earlier Giorgio was saying, the way that architects are taught to think in plan, in draw, make us a little bit unable to think in terms of this eye view, this topographical approach by living and by experiencing physically the space. And so we are keen and very happy to then see our projects from the top, because it's the way we have conceived them from the beginning, the way we think, it's our language as architects. And I think it's very interesting that you bring both these contracts and this repetition into your work. And that was it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina.
I promise I will keep you posted with the ending of this project.
Well, we began by presenting a series of images, a series of photographs that had the United States of America as a kind of subject. And I think that there's a consistent aesthetic preference that you are presenting to us, and that is an idea of an organic homogeneity. And that applies to both your the selection of the old gas stations in the United States, as well as the last series of images of abandoned Pyrenees villages or Spanish hillside villages. And I'm just reminded of the dilemma of contemporary architecture, that there are many architects who have a preference for very minimal architecture, or very stylistically, thoroughly controlled architecture, with the extremes of some of the British minimalists, John Pawson and so on, still Claudius Silvestrin, who don't allow anything alien that they haven't designed to occupy the spaces that they have provided for the clients. And the abandoned rural village that you've shown looks wonderful because it's organically coherent. It's made out of one material, the walls, and so on and so on. The scale of the spaces are similar. There's not a big building. There are no shopping malls. There's nothing that really intervenes out of scale. So there is this notion of a utopia of an organic homogeneity, which may not be reachable with the contemporary society that we are. We lead different lives. We have different demographic structures. We are very, very diverse. And so how to requite an aesthetic preference with the fact of socioeconomic cultural diversity? That is the true challenge of the 21st century. And so I would like to ask Pedro to maybe bring the conference to a close. I'd like to say thanks to everybody, Carolina, George, Carlos and Leonor, who have been working with the team, Pedro and all the other colleagues who've made this, both the selection process as well as the publication itself possible. And of course to Iñaki, our keynote lecturer, presented today, and for your contribution to the publication. I look forward to assembling this publication. There's a lot of work ahead of us, but I think it's going to be absolutely fantastic and a very dense piece of thinking and working. Thank you, Pedro.
Thank you, Wilfred. Thank you again for accepting this challenge and being with us and making all this possible. And thanks to, well, everyone that's has participated, and our colleagues and moderators, editors, and also the invited speakers, all the reviewers, everyone that somehow was related and participated and contributed for open call, selection, the conference, and all the work that is going to be done until we reach the final publication. And now, thank you, Iñaki, for your wonderful lecture and showing us your photographic work, which, as I think, with all the commentaries that were done, was really important to complement and to have this overall view of how photography can be used for really documenting in a critical way, as a research tool, as an inquisitive tool, as also an instrument to think and explore architectural ideas, and also as an instrument that can make institutions and people think and rethink about what is happening in this big transformation that we are dealing with at present contemporary times. And I think this is very important, that this potential that image photography has. And also this conference, I believe, that has showed how photography in itself can complement and enrich a critical discourse relating with other supports of the media, each one with its autonomy, but creating a more richer discourse. I think this is very important. This is our objective. Also, Wilfred, in his last sentence, he said that the world doesn't apply just for one truth, one way of living, of being able to grow economically in more balanced way. How we can accommodate these different perspectives, some more unbalanced than others. And this is a challenge, and that we all have. And I hope that this conference, with all this work, has helped to think critically and to point out other possibilities, also to make different groups of people think about the urban transformation and the real, and what we are doing in this world, and how we can go ahead with more optimistic and effective perspectives. Thank you all very much, and I'm looking forward for working to the final publication, and also for the next global team of SOPHIA journal, and which of course will address contemporary issues and how photography can cope with our world. Thank you all very much, and I hope you all have enjoyed, and thank you for your interest.